here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned. Immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the author Andrew Pira, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all the other groovy stuff. And also his new book that is just coming out, I believe, in mid-October 2025 from Jawbone Press. This is titled Turn My Head into Sound, a history of Kevin Shields and My Bloody Valentine. It's a very interesting and in-depth look at the work of the artist and also the band. Brilliantly put together and stunningly written. So you can find out more about the book and also Andrew's life in this fascinating interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of Andrew's early musical awakening, and then we get onto the book. Anyway, Andrew, it's over to you.
Sure. So I heard a friend of mine in high school introduced me to, when I was about 15, the Smiths, Joy Division, and from the Joy Division album Still, I got into the Velvet Underground. And then at 16, around then, is when, so those were all before my time, kind of when they peaked, you know?
Yes.
You know, because I was born in 72. So in 1988, I was 16.
Yes.
And that's when MBV joined Creation and hit their stride, if you will. So before that, I knew the Smiths well and Joy Division and Velvet Underground and stuff like that.
So what was your first record you bought?
I don't remember. I think I had, I don't know, Andy Summers record or something, but the first record I really remember playing over and over again was White Heat as like a 14 or 15-year-old. I don't remember anything before that, really.
Right. So that was your go-to sort of moment in
Yeah. And
music.
Joy Division and the Smiths, all those records are just seminal to me.
Yes, well, I was the indie kid who was obsessed with that sort of particular period, I suppose. I was very into
that too.
the John Peel show, so you'd sort of listen to all the bits and pieces that he was bringing out or playing, and from anything. But it was also not just indie pop. There was kind of reggae and folk music and death metal, and early rap music. He played a lot of that, and I loved all his. Yeah, various other bits and pieces, dub reggae stuff. I probably just said that anyway. But then what was your first gig you went to?
Yeah, I saw the Police with my parents when I was 12 or 13 for Synchronicity or something.
Right, your parents were very groovy, weren't they?
I mean, my mother, my aunt, but the first show, like Miami Beach used to be really run down before it got revitalized, and all the punk shows and everyone would come through there. So I saw I saw Peter Murphy there. I saw Ramones. Bands would come to Orlando, which is north, and then a couple of years later, they started coming to Miami.
Yes.
So, I can't really remember the exact first band. I was just going to make a comment that it was so much more limited here, the music and the way it's divided up. It's so different with the charts there with John Peel, and just that everything was played together. And it was so much more segregated here.
Yes.
Music. Just so you understand. I mean, I didn't really get into Public Enemy or know who they were really well until, even though Spike Lee had his movie come out, Do the Right Thing, it wasn't until a couple of years later that I really got into them in like 93 or something. 94.
Yeah, because I remember when he played Yo Bum Rush the Show, which I went rushing out and buying, because you still thought it was just going to be I don't know. I didn't realise there'd be a second album or third, and they became the band. But Def Jam Records was definitely quite exciting. And then there was various other labels that came out. But he played a lot of other types, he played LL Cool J. I remember being excited with that. And
Both those are mentioned in my book as influences on Shields.
yes,
Major influences on Shields. Raw, LL Cool J, the Young, his way of rapping, and also Public Enemy, specifically the second and third albums, were monumental influences on his sound.
yes,
The Bomb Squad, not so much the vocals, but the Bomb Squad.
yes. Interesting, isn't it?
Really important influences.
So then, you got into My Bloody Valentine when they were happening. So how did you how did they come onto your radar?
A friend of mine introduced me to them. She was just a year older than me, but you could get Enemies, Melody Makers, Select Magazine in South Florida, Miami. So we read those. And in particular, Felt moved from Cherry Red to Creation. And we bought Doing It for the Kids. And we heard our first, I think maybe that was the first MBV song we heard. It had A Cigarette in Your Bed. And we were following Creation really closely after that.
Right.
She was into 4AD before that, a couple of years before that too. But this girl was a 2 years older than me maybe, and she kind of introduced me to a lot of this stuff.
And at that same time, around the late 80s and 90s, obviously we had the Seattle grunge scene that came in, Sub Pop Records. Did they come on your radar at the same time?
They really didn't, because they were so Nirvana's such a talented band, but because they were so popular, and their second album came out about the same week as Loveless. I don't know if you know that. Like almost the exact same time. And because they were so popular and because they seemed so mainstream, I didn't really pay attention to them, even though people talked about them who I liked and respected. I just didn't make time for it.
No.
So I like Soundgarden and Nirvana a lot, but Nirvana's a really talented band, and so Soundgarden. But just because it was American and because it was popular here, it wasn't something I was interested in. I was much more interested in following the British bands.
Right. So it was it that kind of world of shoegazing that slightly influenced you?
I really didn't see. From the beginning, I didn't see them as shoegazers. We talk about it in the book, but they were so different than Ride or Slow Dive's first album is like everything My Bloody Valentine isn't. I mean, it's just the exact opposite of what they were doing. It couldn't be more different.
Yes.
And the same with Ride, and the same with most of those bands. I mean, I like Swerve Driver, I like Telescopes, and they were doing their own thing, but those bands were using modulation pedals, which really hadn't changed since the 70s, since 1970, like echo, reverb, phasing, flanging. Those were all done by like the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix by 1970. Those hadn't changed. And Shields did something totally different. Those were kind of something you stack on top of your playing. Like you can't interact with them. And what he did with reverse reverb, you can define what he did differently. Was totally is indicative of how intuitive he is with music, and what he did was very emotive and sounded so different because it was just totally different.
Yes.
That's why it took people by surprise, and the story was much more interesting than I was originally just going to do a book that was very basic, just collecting information I had. but I kept uncovering more and more layers that it turned into this big project, and just how talented he was and what he did that was different. And uh, he was so ahead of, he was just ahead of everyone. There was no
Yes.
one close to him, what he was doing.
Because I first came probably really properly was 88 when they did the sort of EP You Made Me Realize, and I think that was
Right.
something that John Peel picked up and probably played. And then I went to see them at the Norwich Arts Centre in 89, and I remember the support band was Silverfish, who I became quite obsessed with. They were on Ouija Records, and there was a bit of a scene. They were a bit of a scene in North London, because there was Silverfish, there was the Faith Healers as well, which was another one of these bands, and in a way you had Lush. Early Lush had that kind of sonic vibe about them, which was quite interesting, and they were on 4AD, and I remember seeing them as a double bill with the is it Pale Saints? Is it Pale Saints? One of those.
That makes sense.
So they were a double bill. So there was a little bit of a vibe, and I think early Carter, the Unstoppable Sex Machine, might have been part of that world as well. I don't know. There was a bit of a North London squat scene, wasn't there, at that point?
Yeah, he was friendly with Silverfish. He produced uncredited one of their EPs. He was friendly with Lush. I think he dated one of the girls for a short while. And I've talked to people in Silverfish at some point, because they were all friendly and got along, and so he knew them. And I like Pale Saints a lot. I think they're a great band. And unless we're kind of doing their own thing, even though they had their own thing before My Bloody Valentine formed. They kind of, as opposed to Slow Dive or Ride or the Boo Radleys, were specifically motivated when hearing My Bloody Valentine to go in a certain direction.
Yes.
They were like, this is what we want to do, and eventually they would find their own voice and all that. But those three bands are good examples of like what the shoegaze thing was, where they were trying to imitate My Bloody Valentine, having no idea what they did.
They had a much more grubby sound, really, didn't they?
Yeah, and then it's interesting. Martin Carr, he used three of the producers Shield used to find out what Shield was doing, and he used that on Giant Steps. And Shield made some comments about that.
Right. Yes.
Saying, they're friends of ours. They won't mind this, but don't say you're not influenced by us, and use all our producers and our techniques, and deny you heard our albums and stuff. You were influenced by us.
Yeah.
You can clearly hear it. Exactly what they took away from him on the Giant Steps and some singles before that.
So just sort of jump into when you decided to do a book, Turn My Head into Sound.
I've been collecting everything on him, and then just for my own purposes, I collect articles on people and stuff that I'm interested in.
Yeah. So when did you start to think about putting this book together?
2018.
Right.
But I had an archive built up already from like 1990.
And was there any other band that you were so obsessed with, or was it just my?
The only other person I'm really obsessed with, I think, is talented, is the Aphex Twin.
Oh, right.
He's a whole other world, and it'd be impossible to do a biography of him. He's the doppelganger to Kevin Shield in some weird way.
Yes,
Putting out tons of material, and just happy and social, and they're kind of opposites. But
So when 2018 came along, you thought, right, I'm going to do the book. At that point, had you still got any publisher interested, or were you?
No, nothing. No, it's very hard to get a book published if you're not if you have no background. This was such a fluke that I got this published, to be honest. Because it deserved to be published. It was overdue, and I worked really hard, and I found the right editors, and Jawbone was the right press for this. but it's very hard to get a book published if you're not a journalist or a celebrity or close to a celebrity or have a background in writing.
Yes.
So it took a long time and many drafts and learning the world of publishing, which is just a jungle.
My God. So
And
there you go. You've had 8 years of fun doing this publication. So you're on the writing, I mean, because it's beautifully written and so in depth. So was this all a learning curve for you from the get-go?
yeah, I mean, and I got a lot of them to think about stuff. Every question that came up, I got to rethink it over this time. And I figured out, they gave you a galley copy of the book. You got to read it, the book.
What did you say? Oh, did I? I just got a PDF.
Okay, but you did get to read it?
Yes, so I've got to. Yes, I've been reading it. I mean, it's never great being a PDF compared to
No, I don't like them either.
but it certainly was quite intense actually going through it, and
Yeah.
I was very, yes, that was impressive stuff. So look, just to then explain, so I was just curious when you started, as one does, but then yes, with the band though, this is kind of for me just going back to my Bloody Valentine, because for me, indie pop for me was like between 83 to 87, which, let's face it, were the years of the Smiths. It was a kind of glorious time, and when they split up, there was
I love
certainly
the
a
Smiths.
musical void that happened, but also ecstasy came along, and then there was this kind of new dance scene. There was a guy called Gerald, there was the Orb, there was 808 State,
Sure.
all this kind of stuff, and there was also the Chicago house scene, and various compilations. Frankie Knuckles started to appear, and all
Right.
that kind of malarkey. So it was a bit of a musical void, so it was kind of interesting. There was kind of, and then we had Seattle with the Bleach album from Nirvana, which obviously, because John Peel played this compilation called Subpop 100, which obviously
Oh, never heard of it.
we were very excited by, and that was when we first heard of and I went to see them. They were supporting Tad at the time, which was quite interesting. So that was my moment, I suppose, when I got to interview Kurt Cobain and the band.
Wow.
So that was 89. So that was all very interesting. So musically then, how does kind of My Bloody Valentine navigate out of that kind of musical
So
period?
So we have nothing like John Peel or a national chart that represents everyone. It's totally segregated. Okay. And even though you would think capitalism, our unrestrained capitalism would give us all these choices, you have more choices there, actually, which is maybe because it's more of a nation state than us. We're so diverse and divided and everything. We're not really a real nation state. There's so many groups and so many things. So the only information we got was through, everything we got was through Enemy, Melody Maker, Select, and occasionally 120 Minutes on MTV.
Mm.
That was only the information we got. So we had nothing like your view of the whole of a wider scene. We weren't African American music didn't really come into it. We bought because I got into dance music mostly actually because of the Chemical Brothers when they
Right.
started remixing uh, uh, pop bands like Saint Etienne and Primal Scream. So I was late to all that because it's so segregated here. I wasn't really hip to some kids had like Run DMC albums or LL Cool J back in the 80s, but as rap was happening with Eric B and Rakim and Public Enemy and all that, and De La Soul hit kind of big, but it's so segregated here, the music. It's such a different scene. But My Bloody Valentine, when You Made Me Realize came out, I just was blown away. And you saw the quotes in the book with Martin Carr and the guy from the Lilies, and Shields grew up. He's grew up his first 10 years here, and he kind of attributes something to that. I don't know exactly how, but that he has just as much of like that Americanism in him as, say, Dinosaur Jr. or Thurston Moore.
Yeah.
And he has that bass presence and that rhythm that most British bands didn't have. I think Simon Reynolds had something like they couldn't uh, they couldn't punch their way out of a paper bag or rock their way out of a paper bag. The British bands. So when I heard him with everything combined, it was rhythm, noise, and really a sense of melody. It was so alluring, and that was just it for me. That was like my generation. That was, I was 16. So, and we followed creation closely because of felt.
Yes.
So that was just like, that just blew us away, as it did a lot of people in Britain, I think. Um, and they followed it up with Feed Me With Your Kiss and Isn't Anything. And those are just that was just startling, I think, to a lot of people. I mean, I think we had a moment there where they were just dominant in some way, in some among the guitar groups there, and even outshone Sonic Youth for a bit.
Yeah, well, I suppose Sonic Youth had they were on SST Records, didn't they? And then they signed to, was it Warner's, I think, which caused a great amount of angst.
I think it was Geffen.
Geffen, that was it, yeah. But
Yeah.
at the time, and no one would really understand this, but being on a major seemed to be an absolute sellout. During the 80s, it was like indie or forget it. You're basically in the same world as Bon Jovi and Cinderella, probably. But I do remember, it seems very strange now how upset we felt about the betrayal. So I think with, the UK band, especially My Bloody Valentine, I mean, they were always going to be on an indie because they went from Lazy Records, didn't they, to
Yeah.
was that the same label that the Primitives were on then, who were from
Yes.
Right, because I remember.
I'm looking up if Daydream Nation was on what label that was on. Okay, that was on Enigma. Okay, so that was their last indie. That was their last indie album.
Oh, so it was, and that was Goo that was probably on the.
Who was the first? Yeah. Okay, I was just
Right.
curious.
But at that time, Creation Records weren't financially doing very well. And I know from.
They were tiny.
And also with Alan having done an interview and also got his book, financially they were a little bit stuffed, weren't they, at that stage? I mean, My Bloody Valentine was causing an awful lot of angst and within the band. And it was kind of interesting because there were bands, like The Times, but there were also people like the Jasmine Minks and The Loft and the Weather Prophets who made some amazing songs. I mean, I Almost Prayed was just indie classic, but it was never going to pay the mortgage. And then they had people like Momus on there and the jazz butcher, Pat Fish, obviously, and a guy called Simon Fisher Turner, who, again, I did an interview with him, and he just the album isn't quite unlistenable, but it probably couldn't have sold more than 20 copies during the late 80s. So Alan must have been getting pretty desperate at this stage with My Bloody Valentine.
Well, it depends on when you want to talk about exactly. I mean, they had two things that sustained them was Alan managed Jesus and Mary Jane for a short while and got a percentage of their contract when they signed with Blanco Negro, which is a subsidiary of a major. He got a bunch of money from that, and then he did a really good deal for the House of Love and got a big paycheck for that. So that sustained them for a good while. Yeah. And then My Bloody Valentine was the first band that was like really brought attention to them. I mean, House of Love, I guess, got some publicity and did okay. And those first two singles on Jesus and Mary Jane, by the Jesus and Mary Jane, got them some attention. But they were tiny when My Bloody Valentine came on still. And the biggest thing they did was they switched distributors, which I don't know the full economics of that, but that put them in like the worst situation because maybe you're owed money and you don't get it right away, or I don't know what happens when you switch distributors. Something happens.
Right.
Switch from Rough Trade to Pinnacle in '89, before Loveless was even started. This is before, so they were they didn't expect to be starting Loveless in that situation when they had no money. Creation had no money. So
Yes.
I guess maybe they were owed money by rough trade and they wouldn't get it for a while because they switched or something, or they had credit with them, or I don't know how it works exactly. But
No.
whatever that did, that put them behind the eight ball. That was the
Yes.
main thing. And then Loveless taking so long, by the time 1991 came around, then My Bloody Valentine was the sum of all their fears that they would never end.
I think
So wasn't MBV really in the beginning that caused the problems. It was as McGee and Green. McGee says they were a couple of chancers
right.
in his expression, uh, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So
Their big kind of break. Well, one of their big moments came when they signed Sugar, Bob Mould's Sugar, because that album Copper Blue. I know from talking to Alan that yes, they
well,
got a very good deal with that, and I think he sort of realised that they were going to be onto a brilliant sort of easy score with that particular release, and they were fantastic during that period.
did you happen to read the David Kavanaugh's book, My Magpie Eyes Were on the Prize, about
No,
creation?
I've got. I might have. Yes, I think I have. Well, I've got it. I'm not sure if I've read it actually.
It's or as Alan McGee calls it, the accountant's tale,
Right.
because it has so many details of their accounting issues and problems. I'm sorry if this is too boring or
No, it's interesting. It's all well.
okay,
I kind of find it all. It all links into to
right.
putting Loveless
So
together.
they were. I mean, you've seen the movie The Producers. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, very.
Where they were trying to have a failure and they could make a lot of money, but if they
Springtime for
had a
Hitler.
really if they had a big hit, it would destroy them. Well, if Ride, there are certain times when if Ride had like had a hit single, they would have had to put out all this money and they would have gone bankrupt. There were several times when he says there were three times they could have gone bankrupt before Loveless, Alan McGee. I mean, they did not have a real proper accounting thing in place.
Right.
And if someone had hit really big in America or something, they don't know what they would have done. They would have had to pay. Rye did so much better than they thought, and they would have just been screwed. I mean, I guess is the term.
Yes.
So they were chancers, and they. I mean, Al McGee and Dick Green deserve a lot of credit for they mortgaged their houses and they did all this stuff to keep the band afloat. They wanted to get Screamadelica out and Bandwagon-esque and Loveless. And then they signed a deal with Sony that bailed them out.
Right. Yes.
Sony gave them a deal for like a bankrupt record label and the catalog and $1 million to spend.
Blimey. There you go. That was quite a nice happy end to. So then just going back to the process of them making Loveless, this is obviously the big album, isn't it? What was the state of the band at that point? Were they quite a harmonious unit?
No, I mean, there's a really funny comment. So there were two engineers hired by Creation. Most of the other engineers came with the studios. One was Alan Moulder, and he was credible. He's considered a posh or proper producer, and they wanted reports from him to know that Shields knew what he was doing. And he was a really big backer of Shields, and they were like, that was a key thing to help Shields out. And the other one is this girl, Angela Dutt, I think her name, which is Indian descent. She called making the record, what was it? The word art, like, what's the kind of art you do? Performance art. They
Right.
call their lives performance arts. it was so bizarre and all over the place, and really, I think after 1990, Shields mainly did most of the album. They
Right.
were all they weren't really together, and then Belinda came in and did the vocals at the end. Colm got sick, and Shields sampled all the drums from him and put the drums together. Colm only plays on 2 songs, really,
Right.
drums, and then he had one contribution that's wholly his own. That's a short 2-minute track, but they were just.
How long did Loveless take to write and record? What was
I
that
mean,
time?
Shields said he had all the songs in his head by '89, but then they, okay, so they put them in cheap studios because Shields couldn't work unless everything was lined up in his brain, unless he felt good. So you had these two issues. So, eh, sometimes it would work quickly, like when Al Mohler was around, they could get more done. And other times they didn't feel, Shields didn't feel well, or their living situation wasn't good, or things weren't good with Belinda because they were a couple, and things really slowed down the summer of 1990. Was
Right.
like was like almost nothing got done. Like they were working a little bit on they're working on the Tremolo EP, and spending months playing with samplers and doing all kinds of things. And it's just varies month to month, day to day, what happened. He says it was like 2 months work over like 2.5 years. They would go in, that other engineer I mentioned, Angela Dutt, I think is her name, Angeli Dutt. She would say they would come in, talk, watch TV, order food, watch more TV, talk. Then they would start at like 2 o'clock in the morning, work for a
Right.
couple hours, and then that's it. And so she hated that. And they didn't have a place to live necessarily during this time. So it was kind of like their home, the studio. It's just all over the place during those years. Everything was in flux. So you can't say this month or that month or this month. It was just every month was like different or in flux, or they would move studios. They mainly settled down at Protocol Studio with Guy Fixon. A lot was done there.
Right.
About a year of the album was done there, but between '89 and the album's release, I mean, they toured Isn't Anything, a short tour for Glider, and then they were just all over the place with their living conditions, with their relationships, Deb doesn't play on the albums at all. And then one of the engineers would just say they would meet up, and then Kevin would just leave with the engineer, and all three would go. The other three would go to the pub.
Right. My God, that's just an
So
extraordinary dysfunctional setup, really, isn't it?
yeah, and so it's like, were they bound to always function this way? Because Kevin Shields, I don't know, he made this crack that they weren't the Beastie Boys. They were not these happy, well-adjusted people. Uh, so it was just this total.
What were they
Just
taking quite a lot of drugs as well at that point?
I
Or
don't think so. I know Shields went out to the raves with Primal Scream and McGee.
right.
That provided some inspiration. But I don't think they had money for drugs. And it's not really, even if they did do drugs, it wasn't really a factor in anything, really. I mean,
Yes.
maybe I think Palm did a little more stuff, and maybe Kevin smoked pot, but that wasn't really a big variable at this point. It
No,
would matter more the pot smoking when they signed to Island. But
right.
drugs, I don't think were an issue at this point
No.
in any
So when
way.
the album eventually comes out, I mean, it does sound amazing at times. There was a lot of pressure from Alan, I would have thought, to have got it finished because his finances must have been absolutely stretched at this
Yeah,
point.
he said he was like crying. He was like begging Shields to finish it, like crying over the phone line,
Right.
like kind of emotionally blackmailing him is the term he used.
Yes.
So he's very proud he got 2 albums and 4 EPs out of Heaven.
Well,
Uh,
absolutely.
and uh, which is uh, which is a lot. The first 2 EPs in the first album came pretty easy. But the other stuff, not so much.
No.
um, they did 2 EPs in '89. They discarded, if you remember, because they weren't better than what they had done, and then their sound really changed with Glider, with Soon. Their vocal wave changed, the guitar changed to some degree, a lot of sampling. Um, no more dry vocals. Their changes are really charted through those 4 EPs, which are
Yes.
key, which haven't been re-released on vinyl, or they've only been remastered for CD. So they're really important to get, I think, on vinyl.
Yes.
They really chart the changes, the progress they made at each point.
Which is amazing.
Um, And Tremolo is really the most underrated, interesting thing they did, I think. Truly the companion to Loveless, if you get a chance to really examine it. It might be their peak.
Yes.
The 7 songs on that.
Amazing.
Um,
Because I went to see them live when they were promoting Loveless, and I think, yeah, from at the UEA, and I think they had EM. I think a band called EMF was supporting them at the time, actually,
really,
who were quite a pop band, actually, which I just
yeah.
remember, at the time you don't think, wow, I'm seeing some amazing gig here. You just go along and just think, well, this has all been very nice. So what happens to the band after Loveless has been released and then obviously the tour? Then what happens to them next? Or
Um,
does it just
oh,
all fall apart?
can I ask you one thing? Do you remember the show you saw in '89?
The one at the ward at the yes, I do very well because it was at the Norwich Arts Centre on St Benedict Street, and yeah, there was it was a tiny place, only held about 250 people. Silverfish had supported them, who I thought were incredible, and I just remember there was all these kids sitting on the stage, just with the band, I suppose, and it was all a lovely atmosphere of noise and energy. So I remember that with fondness. The other one at the UEA, was just a bigger gig, and it was all fine. But
Yeah, the '89 is really a peak in a certain way because there wasn't as much equipment, and it worked really well with their dynamic at that time. Um, and there's bootlegs of those that are just amazing. They come across so well, unmediated by extra equipment. Then they did a small amount of shows after Loveless came out at the end of '91. Okay, and Creation dropped them in January of '92. So they did not ever have the money to get the equipment they needed to do a proper show.
right,
And Shields talks about that at the time. He was really unhappy. And they used some publishing money from EMI to buy some equipment, but they couldn't get, there's so much equipment they couldn't get. And the sound checks would go on for hours, and just, it was not a happy time for them. And
yes,
they didn't sign with anyone right away. They wanted to show they were a competent band. They could do stuff and do a tour and all that kind of stuff. And so they toured. In '92, they toured Europe. They did a two-part American tour that raised their profile. And each show is different, the sound, depending on the venue and how well they could dial it in. They played with Dinosaur Jr. on one of the tours. And if Jay Mascis and Kevin are very close friends to this day.
Right.
And what's that?
I said yes, right.
Yeah, they're very close. So then they got okay. So according to Shields, McGee said, we're this relationship it had run its course really. Um, there's so many reasons why it run its course, and when he dropped them, and Shields was like very nonchalant, supposedly, and McGee says Shields was shocked. So I don't know what really happened
Yes.
when they talked on the phone, but they did let them off very easily. Shields has made that clear. They didn't give him a hard time. McGee really cares about the music, and I like him. And despite him being a fabulous sometimes and being a little crazy, he really cares about the music. And I think the Creation's catalog speaks to that. And Dick Green also.
Yes.
And so supposedly Shields went to bed, and the next morning he woke up and 10 calls were waiting for him for other labels wanting to sign them. But they waited until the Loveless tour was over, and Island gave him the best deal with really no restrictions and a large amount of money.
Yes, amazing. So how did they navigate this? This is the John Major years. Britpop's about to explode. I mean, suddenly there's a very excitable music scene in the UK with lots of bands and guitar bands suddenly become so in vogue. And how do they, My Bloody Valentine, is this just a very dysfunctional period of the band that doesn't exist?
This was the most dysfunctional period of the band and Kevin Shields' life. This was the most difficult time between 93 and 2008 was the wilderness, if you will. This was truly a difficult time. They were advised not to build their own studio, or at least put an album out first, and then they could build their own studio. But they wanted their own studio because they didn't want to think about the cost of studio time and all that. But because of Shield, but it's very hard. I mean, just to get your stereo equipment to work without any radio noises coming in my home, for example, is difficult. To set up my stereo, I find. And they spent like a year trying to set up their studio, and then the board didn't work properly, and they had to return the board, the main mixing board. And then Island, in an act of total charity, stepped in and gave them more money, which wasn't in their contract, and a stipend of £5,000 a month.
And was that just for Kevin or the band?
No, that was for. I mean, that was that they all lived. They all lived in the one house together,
right?
Which was not the original plan, but they were forced to economize because of all their issues. So there was a certain irony there. They were going to save money by building their own studio, but it just backfired, and they were selling off equipment. They didn't tell Island what was going on, and only because of Anne Marie Shields, his sister, who had a good relationship with Island, and Mark Moreau, who was very charitable, let's say.
Yes.
That that he gave them more money and more time and tried to give them a permanent home. And if there's one person Shields kind of owes something to, an apology or something, it's Mark Moreau. Uh, and he eventually came around to saying that they gave him a square deal and everything, despite some other things he said in 2003.
Did Ireland ever recoup any of their money on My Bloody Valentine?
No.
Did they ever get any releases for My Bloody Valentine?
They got 2 songs, basically, for all its purposes. They got cover of the James Bond song, We Have All the Time in the World.
Right.
And there was a Wire cover. And there were a few remixes. There were a few pieces for this compilation called Red Hot Blue.
Right.
A couple like very short songs. And other than that, he did remixes and played on other people's albums. They didn't get any return.
My God.
They if you adjust for inflation, they gave him £1 million
Wow.
and got nothing back.
So yes, and what Mark was it? Do you say Mark?
Mark Moreau was he was chosen by Chris Blackwell, who started Island.
Yes.
You know, he's really he's one of those people like I don't know, Jerry Wexler or Ahmet Artigan or one of these pioneers of the record industry. You know, he made Bob Marley huge. He developed U2. He financed the film The Harder They Come, and he personally chose Mark Moreau because he had similar values. And Mark Moreau was only 29 or 30 when he took over as Island's managing director. And he launched U2, Octung Baby, which was like a very important record for them. And he had a great deal of success with Tricky, PJ Harvey, Stereo MCs, PM Dawn, NWA, the list goes on and on. He made a lot of money for them. He was a very successful executive.
So then, come 97, Ireland and My Bloody Valentine part waves, and the band have also parted waves. So then what happens to, I mean, everyone does their projects. What happens to Kevin Shields at this point?
So he had done a couple remixes before that, but he did a particularly interesting remix for Primal Scream of the song off Vanishing Point, If They Move, Kill 'Em. And it got him a lot of attention. And they rechristened it MBV Orchestra and put it on their next album. But because of that album, that was so interesting. He was getting publishing money and royalties from his albums. But because of that remix, he was approached by everyone to do this is like the height of remixes. You know, they would add 2 or 3 remixes on every single, by anybody and everybody. And he could pick and choose. He get offered for $20,000, 20,000 pounds to do a remix or something. And so he didn't have any trouble supporting himself, I don't think.
And did his emotional and mental state sort of get a little bit better once?
Yeah, he talked about that openly, that he was in a bad place. And there's a whole thing about hypnagogia. Do you familiar with that term? That sound familiar at all?
No, what is it?
It's the state between, the hypnagogic state is between falling asleep, when you're going to sleep and when you become asleep.
Right.
Kind of that weird in-between state. And when they would record, it's a creative state that actually has been used for many years by famous people like Edison, Tesla, Coleridge, Dolly. There's ways to try to bring it about by waking yourself up in that state. Like you would hold a metal ball in your hand. As you fall asleep, the ball falls and wakes you up. And it's a way of you can look on the internet and you'll see all these studies about it at MIT or anything. And it's a way of being you're not of lifting your rational mind and going in your subconscious.
Right.
And when they recorded, they would stay up for days at a time and try and induce these fugue states, strange states, to be more creative and get to your subconscious. So this was always a thing, and this kind of got out of control in around 97, 98. He began experimenting more, and it took him to a bad place. And he didn't really resolve it until 2003 or something, maybe.
Right.
And he really had some psychological, not that he was striking out at people or whatever, couldn't take care of himself, but he talks about it, that he wasn't sure what was real, what wasn't. And there's one book on hypnagogia in English that's very elaborate, and he said that book saved his life because it made sense of all these states, and it explains how different states of sleep and drugs and basically psychedelic drugs, but they include pot and different fugue states. They all summate. They all build on each other and go together.
Right.
And that kind of like a revelation for him, and like it's a whole thing in this book about. I was shocked at what I uncovered. Basically, before I started this book, I didn't understand his journey.
No.
It was much more dramatic and much more difficult than I ever imagined.
So at that point, or at some point, he'd sort of split up with Belinda then.
Yeah, like 97, she was in a really bad place. They cut off, money was all cut off. And she gave an interview. This is interesting. She gave an interview in 2004, not knowing if the band would ever reform or anything. And she talked very openly about things. And maybe if it had been a year or two later, she wouldn't have talked as openly.
Right.
Because Shields started to get things back together around 2006, 2007. So this woman, this Swedish journalist, Ike, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. She did a really elaborate interview with Belinda, who revealed a lot. And Belinda was talking about that, she felt she had to get herself in order. She felt really bad abandoning Shields. And that was their biggest falling out. And she didn't know if they would ever talk again. And this is in 97 is when they fell out. But she gave the interview in 2004. And they didn't know what would happen. She didn't know what would happen. And then the interview showed up in 2008 online. It was an obscure interview and it confused people because she's giving this weird interview when they're getting back together and everything, but it wasn't dated. So that confused everyone.
She gets together with Kevin Coyne, doesn't she? Who's which is the son of Eugene Coyne, who's the son of Kevin Coyne. So when did they get together?
I'm not sure exactly.
Are they still an item?
Son with someone else first,
right?
And then she had a third son with Eugene Coyne.
Yes.
And they're married, and she doesn't do any music with him. No. She sang on one album by one other band. And
are they still together?
Kevin Coyne and her? Or Eugene Coyne?
Eugene.
Yeah, as far as I know, they are.
Oh, yeah. That's nice. So then the band reform then in
Yeah.
'07. This is when they get the Coachella, which was very different because I think Throbbing Gristle even played Coachella, which was quite
Yeah, they
interesting.
started getting these offers like around even 2000. People are starting to talk about the album, and it's reverberating throughout the musical world. And by 2007, they're getting offers to play Coachella. First 300,000, then $1 million, but they're not ready. And a guy from ATP, I can't remember, Barry Hogan,
Right.
the Entourage Party, he is a huge fan. He's been communicating with Shields, and he loans them the money to buy every piece of equipment they want to do the show properly finally. So that was like a big deal to Shields. That was like the
Yes.
one unfulfilled thing. He never put on the show he wanted to. The shows in '89 are amazing, I think. But when they needed more, when things got more complicated with Loveless, it those are the weakest shows they ever did, even though some are good.
Yes. So
And
did they play Coachella, by the way?
they did finally in I don't know what year, 2009 or 2013, or I can't
Right.
remember. They did play finally though.
Yes.
Um, and then
What was the atmosphere like with the band reforming after all those years? Was it quite harmonious?
yes, yes, it was. You can see a video. I talk about it in the book, but you can see a video of them where they first got together publicly for. They got an award from Mojo for like Loveless, for like a being a influential, important album. I can't remember the name of the category, but some other albums were like Tago Mago by Can, or uh, Television's Marquee Moon, really influential albums, or the Stone Roses' first album, or stuff like that. They got this award for doing a really important, influential album in 2008. And you can see there's real, genuine camaraderie and love between them. And there's
Yes.
video of it online. And it's unmistakable. And they never really fell out. It was time to Shields didn't know what he wanted to do, and so they had to move on. They had to split up in 2000. The Calm and Deb left 2005, and Belinda left 2007, and that was the only rational thing to do because Shields didn't know what he wanted to do.
Yes.
So
And so to the present day then, so Debs is still doing musical adventures. What about Belinda? Is she doing or got any musical projects, or is she sort of
no, she went back to her first love of dancing.
flamenco?
Yeah, so I think she really enjoys that. You could tell she made some quips to her students in some of the interviews, and I think she gets a lot of pleasure from that. And she didn't get to graduate her school because she wasn't diagnosed properly with a minor ailment, having to get in and out of her leotard all the time. So that was a disappointment to her. But and that dancing in the video for Soon was completely improvised,
Right.
and I think that's indicative of what a interesting dancer.
Yes,
uh,
absolutely. And what about
and
Colm, the drummer?
so he was around. He was around here on the coast. We would see him occasionally. Because he went to San Francisco to live and work with Hope uh, Hope Sandoval, yeah,
Yes.
of uh, of band,
That was Muzzy Star, wasn't it?
Mazzy Star, yeah, yeah. So uh, before that, they were had Opal, and Kendra Smith was the singer for that, and then uh, Kendra Smith filled in at the end of the Opal tour when Kendra Smith left, and they renamed it Mazzy Star. And she put out, I think they put out a total of 3 albums over the years.
Yes,
Sort of like Mazzy Starlight or something.
absolutely.
It's they got better with each album. The last album had Bert Jantz on it, who I really like.
Oh,
I'm a
yes.
big fan of his and Pentangle.
Well,
And
quite.
they got to use his skills as an engineer, producer, and drummer. And he toured with both Mazzy Star and their band. Uh, what's her name? Hope Sandoval and the Warm Inventions.
Yes.
2002 and 2004, both those bands toured, uh, or one toured each year, and they went to London.
Amazing. Incredible.
And
So what's Kevin? Has he got projects on at the moment, or is it just?
so okay, so he did. So he heard the stuff. They laid down some stuff. They first tried to do the drum and bass project when they were at Island. It's skyscraper music, he called it, which I don't know what that refers to.
Yes.
But it didn't work out. And although there's a couple tracks that are kind of left over, sort of, from that project that ended up on the Blue album, the MBV album, 2013. So most of that album was written in 96, 97, even though it wasn't recorded till 2010, 11, 12. That was really the end of like a 10-year period. So then he right before that, he released that. He remastered his whole catalog on CD, which was good. It sounded really good. And then his big undertaking was he remastered, he did a fully analog vinyl cuts of Isn't Anything and Loveless, which sound amazing. And we get into the whole thing about how music has changed, and even when they remaster albums now, they say, they use the original analog tapes, but they master it with digital software.
Right.
Well, he made an album that's like as if it were 1975, before anything digital existed. So they had to dust off equipment, get people out of retirement, and he only could find 3 places that could do it in all of Europe and England. And the albums sound amazing, just different, and they're really triumphs. So they're beautiful. And
which 3 albums are they?
Isn't Anything was
Right.
he redid that, which wasn't that difficult. Loveless was really difficult because it was mixed on a digital board that was used for movies, because they had to mix the interstitial tracks, so they needed a movie board.
Yeah.
When you do Foley and dialogue and music and all the sounds, so they had to convert that back to analog. So that took years and maybe several $100,000 possibly. I mean, that was a huge project, but it sounds amazing. And then MBV from 2013 was all analog to begin with. So those 3 albums just sound amazing in pure analog. You don't need any big special equipment or expensive stereo. You just need a record player.
Yes.
And then he says he's got like 2 albums worth or 3 albums worth of music ready coming out.
Right.
And I'm sure he does, because he's been playing songs. They've never ever played songs that they didn't record. And he's played at least 2 or 3 songs in their sets. So he's going to unload at least 2 albums. I'm willing to bet anything.
Yes. And where's he based now? Is he still in London?
So he married, I can't remember her name. Last name is Deval or something. I can't remember her name. I'm drawing a blank. You can look it up. He married a model. and they have a house in Dublin, outside Dublin,
Right.
in a studio, and uh, so he has another studio in England, in London. So he's been working with the band, and they all four say they're working with that. They've been Shield's working away, and they're each doing their part. And I'm thinking they have 6 shows scheduled. I mean, this interview he gave to the New York Times a few years back, he said, I let too much time go by. I don't want to wait till I'm 70 to release these albums. So I think he's going to release them soon, uh, sometime during this tour, or maybe a break in this tour. I think they're done. I'm
Mm.
guessing. That's a guess based on nothing. But they are performing several songs, new songs, and they wouldn't do that unless they were recorded.
Right.
They've never performed a song that wasn't recorded.
Yes.
So I think they have 2 albums at least ready to go. And he said they couldn't finish with Loveless, or uh, that they had to put at least 2 more really important albums out. I don't think MBV was that album. Was one of those, even though it's a great album. So I
Yeah.
think they're gonna try to finish big, is what I see.
Yes. And are you going to try and see them on any of these tours?
I'm confident he's gonna tour America.
Right.
I think they're going to. So I'm not making an effort to go over to Dublin or England. Be quite expensive.
It'd be
Uh,
very expensive, wouldn't it?
yeah. So I'm praying that he's going to come here. I just can't imagine that he's not. They're not going to do one last tour. If you've seen any video or heard the bootlegs from 2018, they sound so good. The light show is amazing. Everything is so dialed in so perfectly. They're doing songs that they really couldn't pull off before. Like there's a song called Honey Power that sounds amazing now. And
Yes.
it just, I mean, he's every piece of equipment he could want. And I think I think he's quite well off from the touring, and just from the touring alone. I mean, I think their guarantees when they played in 2008 and 9 were, $100,000 for a show per show plus merchandise. They get paid to play all these festivals. They're in a very small number of bands that can get paid a lot every time they come out.
Yeah.
So I think he's quite well off, even though that was never part of the plan.
No, no.
That was not a priority of his.
Yes, I sort of from memory, did mention because she's got a few projects going on, and obviously, My Bloody Valentine is the one that's going to be. I suppose they're going to be starting to work on that now, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you one thing before I forget. So you've been doing this show for 30 years, is that right?
No, God,
Have
not
you?
30. No, no. This show is kind of probably 8 years ago I started. Well, it's because I was curious what happened to all these indie bands. So I started contacting
Oh,
people. But obviously, the 80s was that decade that I loved. And that's when it's just started as a bit of a compulsive uh, interest, really, of what happens. And during that early time, a lot of the indie bands, there was no interest in indie music from the 80s and C86. I mean, it was like, but then you've noticed in the last few years, there's been books, exhibition, films,
yeah.
documentaries. But 8 years ago, there was like absolutely zero, and bands hadn't started reforming that much either, or hadn't thought about it. And I think part of it was once the person had been in a band and that finished, they got a job or tried to do something to pay for mortgage and live. And then they've started to get into retirement and early retirement and have thought, you know what, I used to love playing music again. And I wonder what happened to the rest of my team, my bandmates. So I think that's a little bit of a generalization, but you get the gist, don't you? There's been a lot of,
Yeah, no, that's the same. I mean, I didn't know if I would get this book published or how it would turn out, but I just felt compelled to do it. because it was an interest, and that's the best reason to do stuff. And if you talk to actors or something that's statistically hard to, make a huge amount of money at, or be
Yes.
prominent or something, that's not never the reason. The reason is
No.
because you care about it. And
So
and
you've
something you're
got, so the book comes out next month, October 2025, doesn't it?
in the UK, yeah.
In the UK. Then does it get printed in, all over America and
I
other
think it's getting
countries?
printed just in the UK, and they're shipping it over here, and it comes out here December 2nd because of the
Right.
shipping time.
Yes. And
I think because
and-
there's no pictures, they were able to print it there relatively cheaply.
right.
But um, every book done at Jawbone, the binding is good. I didn't know who Jawbone were before I applied to them. I went and looked at all my books at the different titles,
Yes.
and there were 3 or 4 companies, and Jawbone was one of them. And every book's been edited by the same person, Tom Seabrook. And so I had two. This book came out so well because I had 2 amazing editors as part of it. All the thoughts are mine, all the research, every idea, that's on mine. But structuring it and all the other stuff, and if you're not a professional writer, you can't learn this stuff in a year. I mean, these people were so talented, and so Tom was there at the beginning of when this company formed. And every book by Jawbone is top notch. And then had a personal editor I had to hire who worked with me for a few years to get it into shape to even apply and do a proposal.
Yes.
So who's been in the industry for 30 years or whatever. You can't just. This is just very fluky that I got picked up by a regular publisher, but the timing worked out, and I'm very happy with the book.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Andrew for giving me the time for that particular interview, talking about his new book coming out on Jawbone Press, titled Turn My Head into Sound, a history of Kevin Shields and My Bloody Valentine. And as I probably have said several times, available from all good bookshops and also online. Just either go to the usual places or go to Jawbone Press and you'll find out more about it. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. And also all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.